Hello, everyone. Welcome back to SportsTimeHQ. I am your host, Fernando, and joining me today is a special guest star today. You may have seen him from Fantasy Pros, but now is the owner of the Fantasy Playbook. That is Kyle Yates. Kyle, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. I'm a little bit under the weather. I am a dad of two young boys, and they are constantly bringing stuff back from daycare. So I got caught again, got hit again by some sort of cold or flu that they picked up. So a little bit under the weather, got a little bit of congestion. Apologies for that, but I am excited to be here with you today.
Hopefully you end up feeling better, and hopefully they don't bring back any more
Right.
sicknesses from daycare. So we're going to be talking about we're going to kind of go in-depth analysis on these rookie quarterbacks. We're going to go maybe with the top five. And first up is kind of a controversial one, whether or not it's going to be Kenny Pickett or Malik Willis being drafted in the first round, being the first quarterback off the board. So as we've seen with Kenny Pickett, I mean, he's from Pittsburgh, 6'3", 220. He's projected to go in the first round, mostly going to be early, maybe mid. But he's kind of been the biggest riser in this year's draft. And he finished as third in the Heisman Trophy race. Kyle, what are your thoughts on him? And do you expect him to be the first quarterback off the board?
Yeah, with Kenny Pickett, you have to look at his career. He's been at Pitt since 2017, so he's been in that program for a very long time now, and really hadn't done much before last season. I think I talked about this on a recent podcast that I did, where Kenny Pickett had never topped more than 13 passing touchdowns in a single season until last year when he came out and had, I think, 42 touchdowns off the top of my head. Just absolutely exploded, like you said there, up in the finalists for the Heisman Trophy there. So I think with Kenny Pickett, the thing that you have to acknowledge right away is he probably doesn't have the elite upside in what we have talked about and seen with the recent quarterbacks that have come through, with the Justin Fields, Trey Lance, even Trevor Lawrence, to the Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, these guys that have the rocket arm and elite mobility. Kenny Pickett doesn't fall into that camp. He doesn't fall into that territory. However, what he does provide you is the Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins level of at least being able to step in and execute an offense to a very, very high ability. He's an incredibly smart mental processor. He does have a solid arm. He does have the accuracy to be able to succeed at the next level. He just doesn't have the mobility and the elite arm strength that we see, and that's being so prioritized with a lot of these other quarterback prospects coming out here in recent years. But with Pickett, he compares to me perfectly for Derek Carr. It reminds me a lot of Derek Carr, where you're going to be able to get at least top 15. He's going to always be kind of in that range in the NFL, where you're going to get a very, very high floor out of this guy, but he's probably not going to single-handedly take your NFL franchise and take them to the next level. So that's one of the things that you have to acknowledge with Pickett, is that he doesn't have the upside of some of the other guys that we'll talk about here in this class, in this conversation. But what Pickett does provide you is probably the highest floor out of all of them.
And did the hand size of 8.5 inches, did that come at any surprise to you, or is that really a big factor that teams should be looking at?
Sure. So with Pickett, and at least why we're talking about the hand size issue, is because that can play a role in your ball security at the next level. The college ball is a little bit different, obviously, than the NFL ball. So as a quarterback, you're trying to grip that and be able to get the same type of velocity that you have on it at the next level. You could have some issues with that translating. Pickett is like a third percentile number as far as his hand size and projecting to the next level. There are very few NFL quarterbacks that have had hands able to aid in his ability to hold onto the ball. He's still got some fumble secure and ball security issues, so that could come into play. I think it more turns towards a conversation of, rather than your projection of Pickett at the next level and his ability to step in and be a competent starter, because I do think the tape speaks for itself, where he's going to be able to step in and provide a very, very high floor. Like I said, all of my previous arguments, those don't get thrown out the window just because he has 8.5-inch hands. The conversation then turns to, where does he go in the NFL draft? How does the NFL value that and evaluate that? As far as that being a low percentile number, I think that will play more of a role in where exactly he goes in the NFL draft versus his projection. I still think that he's going to come into the NFL and perform at a very, very high level. Again, not with the lead upside, but the hand size really doesn't move me off of that argument.
Now, which team do you expect to be drafting him? And do you expect him to be the first quarterback off the board?
There's an argument to be made for Pickett going as the first quarterback off the board. I have him as QB1 in my ranks, but it's really the same tier with another player that we'll talk about. But
Yeah.
so, like I said, though, the hand size throws such a wild card into this, throws us such a curveball where we really can't accurately predict. I could see him going all the way up at number 6 overall to the Carolina Panthers because I think that the Panthers just need stability. They just need someone who's going to be able to step in, execute an offense, and get the ball into the hands of their playmakers. And I think that Pickett would be a really good fit for that. I think he's fine going off the board at number 6 overall if you have the need for a quarterback. You move him down the board, though, into that mid-range of of the first round, and it's a conversation of, okay, does New Orleans, now with their 16 and 18 overall picks, did they get involved in that conversation? They don't feel confident that Jameis is the long-term answer. Like there's such a curveball here with Pickett and that variability with his hand size where we can't accurately predict and say this is where he's going to go.
Yeah, I mean, in my latest projection, I'm expecting Kenny Pickett to be the first quarterback off the board, and that's going to the Carolina Panthers because this could be possible. When also has a Lamar Jackson comparison to is Malik Willis. I mean, but he does struggle in inconsistencies with his ball placement. What are your thoughts from Liberty? Expected to go in the first round. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, so as you talk about that swing for the fences type prospect in this quarterback class, it's going to be Malik Willis. And we've talked about Malik for a few months here now as that player that has an extremely high ceiling, also has a very, very low floor. It's going to depend a lot on what system he falls into as far as his development and projection, because with Willis, you see the elite traits. You go back to my conversation with Pickett and you say he doesn't have the Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes type traits. Malik Willis does. However, what he doesn't have is the ability to be able to execute that offense at a very high level and execute everything that an offense is going to ask him to. There are simple things that he just like accuracy. He just does not have the consistent accuracy that you want to see. His ability to be able to tick through progressions and be able to come to his third read and just get the ball out underneath. Those are things that you just see him try to rely more on his athleticism, which he has, that elite athleticism. He tends to rely on that just a little bit too much, where he isn't executing the finer, nuanced aspects of the position and what is going to require him to succeed at the next level or be required to succeed at the next level. So with Willis, you have to talk about the arm strength. You have to talk about his ability to be able to send the ball 70 yards deep downfield on a frozen rope. His arm strength, it teleports on tape. There are some plays where you watch him and it's from his arm, and then instantly the next second, you're just like, how did the ball get there? How did the ball get to that part of the field, 15 yards on the opposite hash, that quickly? With Willis, he has the arm strength, he has the mobility, but you are going to have to be patient and wait for him to develop in those finer, nuanced aspects of the position before we can talk about him hitting that type of ceiling, which is why I say he has the ceiling, but he also has a very low floor. If he ends up with that system, like let's talk about with Carolina, if he goes to Carolina, I don't like that landing spot for him because he's going to have to be asked to start right away with, either with Sam Darnold, and that's a whole other conversation, but he's going to have to be asked to start pretty quickly. And I don't think that's best. I think that he needs to sit for a while because he needs to learn. He needs to sit and soak up a lot of this information as far as those finer aspects of the position. And I just don't think that he's ready to start right away. So as you look at a development project, someone that you can 2 to 3 years, down the road, we could be talking about him as the next Josh Allen, as that next Patrick Mahomes. Absolutely. But we could also be talking about him as a career backup if he doesn't take those proper steps.
And you mentioned 2 to 3 years, and this is a team that I really think that should grab him, and I think he'd be the perfect landing spot because you just signed this quarterback to a 2-year deal, and that's New Orleans Saints signing Jameis Winston to a 2-year deal. That's a perfect spot. Let him sit behind Jameis Winston for a year, maybe 2, and when he's ready, second year or even third year, that's when you can get the Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes type.
Yeah, I think that you look at the ideal landing spot, and that's really it, is finding the spot where his starter is entrenched above him, at least to the point where you can feel consistent or at least comfortable sitting Malik behind that starter for the next 2 to 3 years, like you talked about. Jameis Winston in New Orleans makes a ton of sense. The question is Willis going to be on the board at that point? Because he has absolutely aced this pre-draft process where we went from, yeah, I think he belongs in the first round conversation to now, I think he might go number 2 overall to the Detroit Lions. And even with that landing spot, I don't hate it because you have Jared Goff. It's the same type of philosophy and structure is where you have Jared Goff above him, where he can sit behind Goff. Now you have absolute, opposite as far as prototypes of quarterbacks in the NFL with Jared Goff and Malik Willis, but at least allowing Willis that time to sit and learn behind a starter like Jared Goff, who you have on the roster for the, next year at least, I think is a really good spot too. It's just going to be a matter of New Orleans, Detroit, who's taking him off the board and when does he go. That's going to play a role into where exactly he can go.
Yeah, and these QBs aren't as big as previous years, so I really don't think he should be taken in the top 5, top 3 to Detroit number 2. I think perfect spot is 6 or even past 6, maybe even in the teens is when the first quarterback could go. So, but there is another quarterback that possibly might actually just sneak into that first round, but more likely could go into the second round, and that's Matt Corral. Matt, he had his 2020 season was 3,337 yards, 29 touchdowns. And then you look at the 2021, it was kind of similar, 3,333 yards, 20 touchdowns. And he was completing 68% of his passes. From Ole Miss, his improvement has dropped with his interceptions from 14 to only 4 now in 2021. And he's got solid accuracy. And in my opinion, this is a perfect spot for Jared Goff and the Lions. I think Matt Corral goes to the Lions at 32. Get that 5th-year option with your next franchise quarterback, and being able to see him progress with Jared Goff still there.
Yeah, I think as you look at Corral, I think there are a lot of reasons to be really in love with his game. You have the ability to execute that RPO type system. He does bring some added mobility to his game. Now, people want to classify him as a dual threat quarterback because of how much he ran this past year, 11 rushing touchdowns off the top of my head. So I think, but I will push back on that. Just at his size, he took a lot of unnecessary hits. I don't think that he has the ability to fall into that dual threat category of what we look at with today's NFL quarterbacks. So I think he has the ability to extend the play, move outside of the pocket and be able to create on his own. But I just don't think he's going to be someone that you integrate as a part of your, run offense with a run game with QB draw, QB power, stuff like that. So with Corral, though, I have a lot of concerns as far as his consistency. That's something where I have compared Corral to like a smaller Drew Lock. And with Drew Lock, we saw the flashes. We saw the ability to push the ball deep downfield at his time at Missouri. And you saw those even throughout his time in the NFL up to this point. You've seen the flashes. You're like, oh, if we could get that every single play, that would be phenomenal. That just hasn't happened with Drew Lock. And with Corral, there are simple things that you see on his tape where you're just like, that needed to be completed. It wasn't part of his receiver. It was just that it was a flat out mess. There are certain things there with Corral that we need to see refined. So people are talking about him potentially up at number 6 overall, the Carolina Panthers. I'm more on your side where I think that he is a late first round, early second round, kind of like what Drew Lock was coming out, right in that range where we say, I think that's a fine spot to take that shot on the quarterback. Get that for a 5th round option. Like you said, I think it's a smart landing spot with Detroit. If they do not go number 2 overall with Malik Willis, then come back at the end of the first round, get Matt Corral, at least get someone to be that long-term successor that you can groom behind Jared Goff.
Yeah, 100%. Getting that 5th-year option is very important. I mean, we've seen the Ravens in previous years trade up to the number 32 to get Lamar Jackson, and Lamar Jackson has thrived over the past couple of years, like we see in the background for you. Someone that, I mean, he has such big athleticism, but he has fallen in the draft to maybe the 2nd or 3rd round. He's from Cincinnati. And I mean, he had 2,180 career rushing yards, and he's got a top-notch arm. But here's the problem. The problem is he can have a amazing play or amazing drive, and the next drive just absolutely throw questionable decisions and really turn the ball over. And that's something that NFL teams are really trying to avoid, and that's Desmond Ritter. And what are your thoughts on Desmond Ritter?
Yeah, Ritter lands at QB4 in this class for me. And I think that you look at a lot of the things where with Ritter, he's started a lot of college games, right? 4-year starter at Cincinnati. He's been a big reason why Cincinnati has taken the steps that they have as a program over the past 4 years is because it's been on the back of Ritter's good play. Now, with Ritter, you look at mechanically, I've talked about this previously, with mechanically, he's really clean. Like he's really worked hard from his lower half mechanics specifically to really shore up that aspect of his game. And there's not a lot that you see consistently on tape where you feel like, okay, I need to rework that. I need to rethink that. But then there are moments where you just flat out misses, even when the footwork is clean, even when he has a clean pocket. The accuracy just isn't there sometimes. And that worries you because when you have someone who has started as many games as Ritter has, who has the clean mechanics, then you say, okay, I don't know what to clean up. I don't know what to work on for him to continue to refine. So that's something where we look at Ritter. I don't think he goes in the middle of the first round. I don't think he's a first round quarterback when it's all said and done. I don't think that I see him falling to the third round. Like you mentioned, I think he's going to be early second in that territory because he does have the traits that can lend itself to, not necessarily to Malik Willis's level of athleticism or that arm strength, but pretty close. And so if you can figure out what's going on with that accuracy, with that consistency, and you can work that out, that's another guy that I wouldn't be shocked if Detroit takes at 32 instead of Matt Corral, right? If they take the shot on Ritter, because he has more of the traits of what is lining up with today's NFL quarterbacks versus Corral, then I wouldn't be shocked if it's Ritter at 32 instead of Corral.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I do think Desmond Ritter gets drafted in the beginning of the second round, and a team that I think could actually probably take him is the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, again, he's a developmental quarterback. He shouldn't be your first game starter of the season, and you can really help him trying to perform better drives. And you got Matt, not Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan got traded. You're Marcus Mariota. So, I mean, you got Marcus Mariota. You got the offense. Just try and build for Desmond Ritter in the future.
Yeah, I like that landing spot. I think that's a perfect spot where you can have him sit behind Mariota. Who knows how long Mariota is going to be starting in Atlanta, but at least at that point, then you have the alternative to be able to go back to and say, okay, if Mariota doesn't work out here being reunited with Arthur Smith, then we can at least pivot to Desmond Ritter and see what the rookie's got.
Exactly. And then the last quarterback that we are going to talk about is Carson Strong. And this is a quarterback that kind of can go around day 2, maybe even fall to day 3, second round to fourth round projection. I expect him to probably get drafted in the third round, to be completely honest, but he does have the arm strength, the accuracy, the touch. I mean, he is one of the great top prospects. And again, he could very much be drafted in the second round. And a team that really should go after him is someone that has traded their star quarterback, got a not so good quarterback, and that is the Seattle Seahawks. You got Drew Lock there. You might as well get Carson Strong. What are your thoughts on Carson?
Yeah, with Strong, you definitely see the arm strength. You see the ability. I think it was like the second play that I turned on of his tape is just an absolute bomb, 70 yards deep downfield, right into a bucket. Like, couldn't be placed any better for his receiver who's in double coverage. Like, it's just the absolute perfect throw. However, then kind of like with Ritter, like with Corral, really once you get past Pickett with Willis, and this is kind of the theme that you'll take away from this conversation, is a lot of these other guys have consistency issues, question marks, right? That's the reason why we're not talking about this as being as great of a class as we've seen in previous years. So with Carson Strong, I talked about with Ritter, where you have the lower half mechanics and you see some of those misses on tape and you with the accuracy and you're like, what's going on? What's wrong? With the accuracy issues with Carson Strong, you can rewind that tape. You can see that his footwork is all over the place. And I had a really good conversation with Tim Jenkins on my podcast, the Fantasy Playbook podcast, the 2022 quarterback class preview. And he was talking about the difference with West Coast style quarterbacks in college and air raid system quarterbacks, where they're not being asked to be super sharp with their footwork. So it's not necessarily that Carson Strong doesn't have the ability. It's just that the timing, there's no real timing of the system there for him to fall back on with his footwork, where he's landing with his back foot, being able to hitch and then get the ball out. So it's something there where it can be cleaned up. It can be refined, but I have concerns about that ability for it to be with Carson Strong, because when you see that errant pass, you can rewind it. You look back at his footwork, it's all over the place. So there's some things there to be cleaned up. You also have to talk about the knee issue. There's an injury history there with Carson Strong. Could be something where we see with previously like Jay Ajayi, right? With the knee issue, maybe even Todd Gurley, like that's been talked about. That's something where we're not going to really find out about and really be privy to that information with medical checks. So we really have zero clue where Carson Strong is going to go in the NFL draft, because there's going to be teams that value the arm strength, value that accuracy at times, but then you also have to bear it with the injury history and the lack of mobility. He does not have the mobility that some of these other guys in this class do, like even Sam Howell out of North Carolina, who we won't even talk about here, but who I also like. I have at QB3 in this class. So there's reasons why Carson Strong could go in the second round. There's reasons why he could go in the fifth round.
Exactly. And that's exactly why his draft position is all over the place, because we really don't know where he's going to go. But anyways, that's going to do it on our top 5. Kenny Pickett, Matt Corral, Malik Willis, Desmond Ritter, and Carson Strong. And before we go, Kyle Yates, do you have anything you want to point out on the Fantasy Playbook, what's to come, anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure to go over to youtube.com/the Fantasy Playbook, cranking out content over there. You can find the podcast pretty much everywhere that podcasts can be found. Make sure to check it out as well. Pumping out a ton of content here as we gear up for the NFL draft and having some amazing guests on, some amazing conversations. So make sure to check it out there.
And you guys heard it here. Make sure to go follow Kyle Yates all over social media at KyleYNFL. Kyle, it was a pleasure having you on. Once again, my name is Fernando. I am your host of Sports Time HQ. Be sure to come back next Tuesday as we have Matt Hicks coming on the show at 8 p.m. Eastern.